Hello everybody, 'tis I, TheRumpledOne. Basic Disaster Life Support, Course Manual 3.0. Chapter 8, Chemical Disasters. Hopefully, you and I won't ever have to deal with one of these. But once again, it's good to know these things. Okay, here we go. They talk a little bit about the background. But this is something that we need to distinguish the difference between a chemical emergency and a chemical disaster. A chemical disaster is different from a chemical emergency in several ways. At the fundamental level, a disaster differs from an emergency when the needs of the incident exceed the capacity to respond. So in other words, an emergency requires it's like urgent. It requires your immediate attention. It's like drop everything else because we have an emergency. But a disaster is when it's an emergency, but it's so huge that we don't have enough resources to respond to it, to handle it. And that's a distinction that you have to understand. And then we talk about chemical exposure clues. Okay? And so you might see something that has that will make people choke, or something that'll make their skin blister, or something that it causes them to asphyxiate, or that they might lose control of their body because it's a nerve agent, or it might incapacitate them. So those are some of the clues. And there's other clues, such as an unusual increase in the number of persons seeking care for a rapid onset of symptoms. So in other words, the local health officials need to pay attention if all of a sudden they're getting all these calls and people showing up with the same symptoms. Rapid onset of illness with little or no warning. 1 minute you're fine and the next minute you're like falling over, convulsing. Unexplained illness or death among young or previous healthy people. Once again, somebody who never gets sick is now ill. Presence of unexplained odor, low-level clouds or vapors at the scene. I mean, that's self-evident. Emission of unexplained odors from ill persons. That they have a funny smell coming from their bodies. That it's just unusual. Clusters of illness in persons who have common characteristics, such as drinking water or eating food from the same source. I mean, if a bunch of people go to a restaurant for lunch that day and they all turn up sick, I mean, that's pretty obvious. Unexplained death of plants, fish, or animals. It's just all this, remember that one place where all the birds were dropping out of the sky, or you see a bunch of fish floating in the river or lake? A syndrome, suggesting a disease commonly associated with a known chemical exposure. So, if it looks like you've been exposed to something, then probably you have been. So it's one of those things where you don't really second guess, you rely on what you see. Sudden unexplained weakness, collapse, apnea, or convulsions in previously healthy people. Same as what I said earlier. Dimmed or blurred vision. Hypersecretion syndrome such as tearing, drooling, or diarrhea. Inhalation syndromes. Eyes, nose, throat, chest irritation, or shortness of breath. Or burn-like syndromes. Redness, blistering, itching, sloughing. So these are some of the things that are the possible clues of a chemical release. Then they talk about chemical detection devices, things that the hazmat teams would have, incident management and workforce protection, and general casualty management considerations, triage considerations. Once again, remember this was put out for health professionals, but it's good for everyday people to know these things so they can be able to be aware of the situation and assess it properly. And then there's the casualty assessment with all the different type of onsets that can happen. The different organs in your body that would be affected, or bodily systems that could be affected, such as your central nervous system, respiratory system, circulatory, your skin, your GI tract. Then they talk about the different treatments and the management of these agents. I'm not going to go into all the details because, once again, you should try and take this course if at all possible. But they talk about choking or pulmonary agents, cyanide agents, and how to diagnose cyanide exposure. Once again, it's a pretty detailed chapter. Nerve agents. Well, I tell you, that's something you sure hope you don't have to get exposed to a nerve agent. Then they talk about pediatric treatment considerations. Because children have a higher metabolism and they breathe at a faster rate, so they would get a dosage much quicker than an adult or older person. Then they talk about some of the large-scale chemical disasters, Bhopal, India back in '84, the Tokyo sarin subway attack in '95, and actually the British petroleum oil spill, Gulf of Mexico, 2010. And then they give a summary and some discussion points. So I hope maybe you learned something with this chapter. And once again, if you can take this course in your area, I would highly suggest you sign up for it because it's free and it's very informative.